Okay. To respect everyone's time, we want to start immediate right now at 1 p.m. Let me introduce our speaker today, Dr. Suzanne Tomlinson. We're really excited to have you here today, and I will have a brief introduction for Dr. Tomlinson. Dr. Tomlinson is the Director of Research Programs and Strategic Initiatives at the Gulf Coast Consortium for Quantitative Biomedical Sciences, abbreviated as GCC. GCC is a collaborative network spanning multiple institutions and disciplines. With a dual PhD and an MBA, she specialized in guiding biomedical scientists through the complex landscape of funding. Dr. Tomlinson has led workshops and programs such as the separate-funded Cancer Therapeutic Training Program and the GCC's FCT, Foundation in Cancer Therapeutic Crash Course. Drawing on her extensive experience with federal grants, NIH, state awards separate, she plays a pivotal role in helping researchers secure and strategically manage a diverse funding portfolio. Thank you so much, Dr. Tomlinson, for coming here today. The floor is yours, and we will have Q&A section at the end of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wang. I'm very, very happy to be here. It's been a privilege and actually one of my favorite things in working with several institutions to work closely with several of Texas Southern University's faculty. And so some have become dear friends and few were even at my wedding. And so it's a real privilege to be here. I really hope that you find this helpful. I will say up front, let me go ahead and share my slides real quick. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes.
So I want to say real quick, that I love putting these slides together because honestly, I find it helpful for myself. Things are, it's a different funding landscape than we've seen in the past. And so it's really good to think about not just strategies for your science, but strategies for how you're going to get your research funded. I will tell you, I work on a lot of grants with a lot of faculty from all of our member institutions. As I mentioned, I've done several with TSU. Most of these are in the NIH space or CPRIT space. I have done written and been awarded a few philanthropic grants. But I don't want to present myself as the ultimate expert in any of these. The things that I'll present today are my own personal preferences, things that I've observed over the years and the way that I go about strategically trying to get grants. We've been very successful. I would say that is in large part due to the incredible faculty that we put together in the teams that are parts of these that make up the grants. So with that, today I'm going to talk about funding opportunities and strategies. In the background of this slide, that is the Texas Medical Center, TMC skyline. And as we go through these, I want to say that I'm hearing and meeting with people all over the country that are scrambling right now because they're losing grants and they're trying to find their unique edge in how they can be competitive in a lower budget per institution environment. And I see across the board, one of the number one strategies is to develop consortia and strong collaborations. And that is something that we have unique to Houston. We have the largest medical complex in the world and so many academic institutions that are already, collaborating with each other, but so many that are new to the area that aren't even aware of the collaborative opportunities. So as we go through all of these, I just want to put it out there that this is our unique niche that we don't have in other places in the United States. Okay, so let's see. Okay. I wanted to start with this. I thought this was really cute. It's some PhD comics. Grant me the patience to endure the students I cannot change, the audacity to publish the things I can, wisdom to get tenure. Some of it makes a difference, which we know that's not true anymore. But mostly just grant me. And over the years, I've talked to many faculty and said, ask the question, what is it that it would take to get to to push your research program forward, to go a little bit further, to get it to the next level? And the answer is almost always money. I need more grants. I need more money. But I hope that by the end of this presentation, we're going to talk about grants, but I hope that I have impressed to you that it's really about your strategy on several different levels. While writing a grant is a heavy lift, I suspect everybody on this call knows that. But if you look at this guy right here with this huge barbell with more weight than I can imagine lifting, if writing a grant is this heavy of a lift, the planning and the strategy is even more important. Without it, you can write the best looking grant in the world. You can have consultants proofread it for typographical errors, grammatical errors. But if you don't have a compelling strategy and plan in advance, you'll be a part of that group that just has to write 10, 15 grants before you get one. And I hope that I convince you today that that number is going to go up in today's funding climate. But if you get on things early, develop some habits and pipelines and strategies in your lab, in your research program, the goal is that you write grants that have a better chance of getting funded so you don't have to write so many. The objectives for this webinar are really only threefold, pretty simple. I'm going to just cover, a high-level view in hopes that you'll gain a deeper understanding of federal philanthropic industry and other funding sources. That you'll gain deeper understanding of web-based resources and have a better sense of maybe some new strategies to make yourself and your program more competitive for funding in the future. We're going to start with federal because I think that's what most of us are familiar with. And even, in the current funding landscape, federal funding makes up the majority of biomedical research funding. And so we're going to spend some time on that, but we will talk about the others. So I'm sure you're familiar with NIH. I've worked with several TSU folks on NIH grants. DOD is also a source of funding that fewer have explored, but I've definitely had some success with DOD. Recently had a DOD grant funded. PCORI, we'll talk about that. There's others like CDC, NSF, DOE. CDC and NSF, certainly you may find something where your research fits into the priorities of those funding organizations, probably not DOE. But anyway, we're going to focus on NIH and briefly talk about DOD and PCORI. Before even talking about funding agencies and what those grants look like, you have to ask some fundamental questions about your research programs. The first thing is your research fundable? I've met many people over the years that find something really cool. And as scientists by nature, we're inquisitive, we're curious, and we get excited when we learn something new. For NIH, it really has to have a direct impact and a potential big impact on healthcare. So you got to think these questions through honestly. If it is fundable, who's going to fund it? And does my research align with their funding priorities? And I will tell you that for all of the NIH institutes in particular, and CDMRP will talk about them as well, these priorities change over time. I mean, I think we're seeing that now, right? I mean, we went from a heavy investment of NIH into infectious disease research, and now a move to kind of go away from that to more chronic illnesses and age-related disease research. So this changes, and so you always have to be willing to try to align your research or find the institute that aligns with your research. Who else is in this space? You know, you need to know who your competitors are. I mean, we don't really want to talk about them as competitors in science because, you know, there's this noble goal of we want to, you know, just increase knowledge and increase access and all those things. But at the end of the day, they're the same people that are going to be in the study section with you. So you need to know who else is in this space. You want to know what other projects has that particular institute funded. Are they similar to your project? What sets your research apart from what anyone else is doing? And this is huge because if you've served on a study section, I manage a grant program, so I have sat in many of these review sections. You will see that everybody says similar things. And the thing that'll kill it quicker than anything is somebody going, there's so many other people doing this. This is just not exciting. You have to find what it is that sets your research apart from what anyone else is doing. What level of detail is typical for these grants? I mean, you may have a great idea, but if somebody else has a great idea, even if it's not the same one, is there a certain level of detail that's expected? This can inform how much preliminary data you think you need, or what kind of approach you need to describe and at what level of detail. Is the significance and impact of my proposed project exciting and sellable? I could probably bold, all cap, make this a different color font because this may be one of the most important things on here. We'll talk more about it as we go forward. But this has got to be a major question, significance and impact. And I would say it may seem significant and impactful to you, but you should talk to some other people and see how exciting and impactful they think it is. I encourage everybody to think about what is the high-hanging fruit. It is so easy to get bogged down in your research and just go, okay, I just need these I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to move my hands every once in a while or my light will stay off. You know what, we get kind of bogged down and I just need a slight new direction to build a new grant. And it's easy to lose sight of what is the big picture, what is the high hanging fruit. If you can tie your research to that, it becomes much more exciting and much more sellable. You want to highlight the strength or resource that you bring. This is your previous publications, a new method that you developed, something that you are uniquely expertise in and uniquely expert in. And then you want to be honest with yourself about what you're missing because that will inform the type of collaborator that you need. And I can't say it enough. You can find the collaborator you need 99% of the time right here in Houston. And, you know, of course, I work for a collaborative organization, so I'm spoiled to only working with people that want to collaborate. But they're, you know, in general, the people that are in Houston are willing to collaborate, whether that is an assay that you need or equipment that you need. We've got cores, you know, across all of our institutions that are available. You can find almost anything you need if you don't already have it at TSU. But you have to be honest about that because the reviewers will figure out what it is that you're missing. You need to address it and show how you're not going to be missing that thing. Who are the program officers and what is it that they think? And as you're asking yourself these questions and answering these questions, you have to be honest and you have to be willing to let go of it, pivot, get a new plan if needed. You may have to change course. You may have to rethink the whole thing. But it's better to do that sooner rather than later. But I want to just share with you what I think. There's several resources we're going to talk about, but one of them, this first one I'm going to share, I believe is one of the most important. And when I show it to you, you're going to be like, oh yeah, I know about NIH Reporter. I've used it. And I'm certain that most of you have used NIH Reporter. it's only been in the last few months that I have recognized all that this does that I didn't know that it did. What I typically use it for, because I'm putting together, large multi-institutional grants, is I'll go on NIH Reporter, I'll pull up a Houston search, and I'll see who's doing whatever particular research. If I want to know about cancer drug development, who's doing that here? And I can find that very easy. But if I am an individual investigator that's wanting to answer some of these questions that I just posed a while ago, it's also very valuable. Some of the things that I'll highlight are that it's a searchable database of NIH-funded projects. You probably know that. It also can allow you to understand funding trends and priorities. And this is really, really valuable. If I remember when I get to the example, I'll show you when you look at trends, how you can see things like I just said, how aging is going up, how neurodegenerative disease trend is going up, how infectious disease is going down. And you can monitor these trends directly from NIH Reporter. You can identify gaps in the science as well as the Institute's funding portfolio. If you see that a particular institute has 5 priorities and you look at what's currently funded and you see that one of those 5 priorities only has a couple of grants, you highlight that in your grant. Not only does this fill a gap in the science, it also fills a gap in your funding portfolio. That gets reviewers' attention. It helps to refine your project strategy to be able to evaluate your idea against funded projects, and so that you can see how yours is innovative. And you want that. I mean, if you go on, and it's discouraging to find somebody that's doing practically what you're doing, and you may think that you're doing it even better, but it will give you the idea of what you're up against in a study section. It helps to identify potential collaborators, understand trends for categorical spending, helps you to identify potential program officers, which we'll talk about in a minute. You definitely are going to need to identify program officers to determine the relevant study section. And I want to just mention their matchmaker function, which is where you can answer a lot of these questions. And so real quick, I'm going to get out of this and go to NIH Reporter so I can just kind of show you what I'm talking about. So right here, just right off the bat, you can see some stats for funding by state and by institute. You can see NCI is way, way up there. NIAID, infectious disease, not surprising since there's been such an emphasis since the pandemic on funding infectious disease research. I want to point out, you can search, but there's also an advanced search, which is really valuable. You can look at several things. You can, like I said, I often search just by the city to see what's here. You can also search by the mechanism or a particular institute. And then, of course, by keywords. So I suspect that many of you have already done advanced searches, but as I mentioned, I wanted to look more at Matchmaker. If you haven't done Matchmaker, I'm going to use this is something that a search I did recently, soluble epoxide. Okay, so I'm going to do a search for soluble epoxide hydrolase inhibitors to treat multiple sclerosis. If I search for this, it's going to give me a list of projects. It's going to rank them in the match for how good of a match they are. And you can see here that if I scroll down, they start off a high match, 438. Then they start dropping. And, as I get lower and lower, it's less of a match. So that's helpful. You can see here the institutes that are funding this type of research, primarily NINDS, some NIAID, some NCI, Cancer Institute, NCATS. You can see that most of these are R01s. And so, these are, you can actually even see study sections. Let's see if I can find If you scroll down here and we look at this top one, you can also view, hit view, and you can see a lot of the details, which is where you can answer questions like the level of detail that I mentioned. Sorry about that. So you can review the abstract, their public health relevance, their keywords. You can actually get the emails of the program officer and that person. If that's somebody that you think maybe they have an assay that you think could be really helpful for your research. You can click here and you see their emails right off the bat. So you can find out about program officer, special emphasis panel, funding information, categorical spending, sub-projects, publications, patents, outcomes, news and more, history. So there's just a ton here. I really liked the similar projects because this, again, kind of moves into a search of things that are less obvious, but whether it's a technique or a particular type of technology, it'll identify similar projects for you. So I won't spend any more time than that on this, but I did want to show you some of those things because there is just a lot more information that you can learn on NIH Reporter. So next I want to talk about federal funding and some resources for finding those funds. You've probably have already been to the NIH Guide for Grants and Contracts. This is NIH's official source for all of this. It's searchable. You can subscribe with put your filters on what it is that you're looking for, save that search and subscribe to receive updates. This gets updated daily. I have some of these saved. I think I get them every week. It seems like it's more often, but it's definitely something you need to do. This one is specific for NIH. Grants.gov is a centralized portal for all federal grants. And so it's searchable as well. It can possibly be a little overwhelming because it has all of them, but you can filter it and you can select just NIH if you're interested in just NIH grants. You can also select the other agencies. You can filter it based on eligibility, the funding instrument, the category, the agency, like I just mentioned. It also has posted opportunities that are already out there, and then it also has forecasted. And so these can give you an idea of what's in the pipeline. Now, some of those that are forecast don't come to fruition, but I can't tell you the number of times that I hear somebody say, I can't believe this grant's perfect, but it just came out and there's only a 1-month lead time. Well, often those things were forecast. And so if you pay attention to forecasted grants, sometimes you can get a little bit of a jump on those. I've got these links here. I'll share the slides later. You can take a look. If you find grants.gov to be intimidating, they actually have a kind of a beta site they're asking for feedback on called it's simplergrants.gov, literally. And so, if you look here, it's a little bit of a different interface. I did not spend much time on it right off the bat. You can see that as you search these grants, it gives you the award maximum, which is helpful. You need to know kind of, is this worth my time? Next, I'll talk about PCORI. This is Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. I included the URL at the bottom of this slide. Again, this website is searchable. They fund patient-centered comparative clinical effectiveness research and projects that support that kind of research, whether it's new method development. They also support programs that disseminate and implement the findings from the PCORI-funded research studies. Searchable, filterable. They also show open opportunities as well as upcoming. So this is similar to the forecasted. It's really, really beneficial to look at upcoming and forecasted opportunities. I'll talk in a little bit as a strategy, putting these things on your calendar well in advance, or just setting aside time, whether it's once a month, whether it's once a week, to take a look at these. There's a website for that. And then if you want to see what types of projects they've previously funded, which as I mentioned on NIH Reporter is incredibly important for many reasons, they also have the Explore Our Portfolio that allows you to do that. For the PCORI grants, these are typically academic investigators are eligible. Budgets can be up to $5 million over 3 to 5 years. Again, they want to see comparative effectiveness and a lot of the stakeholders being engaged throughout the program that you're proposing. All right, so next I'm going to talk about DoD, the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program. So this is CDMRP. I've gotten a couple of grants, been a part of a couple of grants through this mechanism. They want to fund research that addresses specific health conditions and injuries with a strong emphasis on those impacting military service members, veterans, their families, and the general public. So when you're thinking about what it is that you do, you may be thinking, well, I don't know that it impacts military, but almost everything impacts military families and really people in the service in general and the general public. So I really hope that you'll consider this as a potential funding source if you haven't already. Specific diseases, just listing some here, pretty much across the spectrum. At different times, they have different things that they prioritize, as is true for the NIH institutes. They fund the full research pipeline, whether you're doing very, very basic research or you are doing drug development at very late stage drug development. Huge emphasis on impact and innovation. This is also true for NIH, but possibly a little bit more for DoD. They really like collaboration, where NIH is wanting to see it more and more, especially for particular mechanisms. You really have to have it. Sometimes that's with other academic institutions. They also like to see academic industry partnerships. Several different types of awards. Their Discovery Award is for new concepts, untested theories. They have an investigator-initiated research, which is similar to your other investigator-initiated research grants. They fund clinical trials. They have impact awards, lifestyle and behavioral health interventions, technology and therapeutic development. I mean, within these, people from TSU are coming to my mind that are in these spaces that this could potentially be a source of funds for. They have a 2-tier review process, starting with peer review and programmatic review. Something that's unique to DoD is they include consumers in that review, meaning if you are writing a grant, for instance, on breast cancer, it is likely that they are going to have a breast cancer survivor, a patient, or a breast cancer oncologist on that review. So I mentioned it earlier, and I will mention it again after this slide. The significance is crucial. You have to sell why this is the best thing for whatever it is. In the case of breast cancer, this is the first in class, crosses blood-brain barrier, prevents metastasis, whatever it is, you need to be able to talk about that and just the huge burden that without your technology is going to remain as part of the limited healthcare and really is an unmet need. They also have some awards for postdocs and residents and early career investigators. This is the website, but I will say, because of the .mil, several institutions' firewalls for some reason block it, but you can also limit your search on grants.gov to DoD, and that'll pull up the CDMRP grants. Like I mentioned, these are RFAs that cover specific diseases depending on what their priorities are at the time. Budgets range from $500,000 to $1 million a year. Payline averages about 10%. That can vary a little bit depending on the program. And like I mentioned, they really have the advocacy involvement in the peer review process, and they really want to see patient-centered outcomes. All right, so now I want to kind of shift back to NIH. Pretty much all of you are eligible for NIH grants because you are a U.S. academic institution, a university. You don't have to be for all of them, and I definitely work with a number of people who are writing grants from the position of a company that they've leveraged out of their institution, the SBIR, STTR grants. You can have one PI or multiple PIs as long as you have whatever the required training and credentials it is that's required for the particular grant mechanism. Review cycle for new applications for R01, R21, R03, February, June, and October is typical, although I'm sure you're aware there are special calls that go out and they will fall outside of these cycles. Scientific merit review, typically 4 months after you submit the grant. The advisory council typically meets about a month later, and you're looking at an earliest start date of 7 to 8 months post submission. Career awards, very similar receipt dates, typically for standard ones, as well as review and start dates. I will spend a little bit of time highlighting the R01 because I know that's one of the goals of TSU is to increase the number of R01s. While I talk about some of the specifics of R01s in a minute, I'll talk about strategies, and I'll probably say it again, but even though I am highlighting R01s, these are applicable to all of the R grants, most of the R grants. And so, especially when we're talking about strategies, but the R01, 5 years renewable for discrete projects, has to be an investigator with a doctoral degree, has to have clear significance, innovation, and strong preliminary data. There's not really officially a cap. There's modular, but if you can do a modular budget, if you keep it at 250,000 direct costs per year, but you can get approval for up to 500,000, even more than that a year. You just have to do that in advance. Pay lines vary. NCI is the lowest as of May of this year. 6th percentile gets funded. ESIs do a little bit better. So that 6th percentile is for your more established investigators. NIAID, 8th, so a little bit better. And then NIDDK at 13th. Both of those are specifically for established, so they would compare with the 6th. So you can see NIDDK twice as high of a chance that you're going to get funded than if you're submitting at NCI, at least currently. So here's the strategies. The first thing we're going to talk about is the significance and innovation sections, as I mentioned a couple of times before. For this, you have to frame an urgent problem. You have to talk about the knowledge gap and unmet need. You have to convince the reviewers that your project has transformative potential, even a paradigm shift, how it's going to open new avenues for therapies, understanding whatever it is. You have to tie it to a public health impact. You want to quantify the burden, describe how your findings will provide benefit to patients. The reason for this is that it is a fact that reviewers spend the most time on the significance and innovation sections. If they don't think the problem matters, and they may even think it matters, they have to believe and be convinced that your idea is novel. And I'm going to go beyond that to say it has to excite them. If it doesn't do that, the rest of the application isn't going to get a fair read. They're going to go through the motions so they can give you some comments and give you a score, but pretty much they're done after significance and innovation. So I can't highlight this enough. You spend time on these sections. So in addition to crafting compelling significance and innovation sections, and again, this is not just for R01s, this is for any grant, particularly the NIH grants. Design logical and feasible aims and approach sections with strong preliminary data. You want to present clear testable aims. Each one should have a hypothesis, rationale, and measurable outcomes. Sometimes I even include a timeline in the aims. Some grants require that you do. You need to treat each aim as a mini project so that you avoid the appearance of dependency on other aims if at all possible. You can show synergy without hard dependencies. You want to talk about how data from AIM-1 will inform studies in AIM-2, but not enable them. One way to kind of show that synergy without dependency is that, there's a shared core that's going to be utilized across all of the aims. This is frustrating because in reality, we do set up our grants to be logical. If you want a logical, there's a step 1, a step 2, a step 3, but you really want to try very hard to avoid the appearance. I see it more than anything. It looks like AIM-2 is dependent on AIM-1, and it's super frustrating. I'm sure some of you have experienced that frustration. Definitely want to back up each AIM with pilot data, no matter how modest, especially now. I will say this may not be as true for an R21, but for the R01, you better have some pilot data for every single AIM. If you haven't completed the work yet, you clearly need to outline a risk mitigation plan. The reason for this is that reviewers worry about feasibility and wasted effort. They look at independent aims as evidence that you won't lose an entire project if one line of inquiry fails. So keep that in mind as you're trying to write those as mini project stories. In addition to these first two that we've talked about, the third one is building your team and environment to be responsive to the review criteria. So you read about that at the typically toward the end of the RFA. You want complementary expertise and you want defined roles. This is where, you can use biosketches for this, but you also want to include this in the actual text. You want to highlight your institutional support. This is getting tougher because I was on a call a couple of days ago and was told from multiple institutions that they're not able to get as much institutional support as they have been in the past because budgets are being cut. There's concern about IDC rates being cut. But it is really, really important. You want leadership commitment. If you can't get that or you can't get as much as you want, you need to describe all of your unique resources. So this can be helpful. Make sure it aligns with NIH priorities and cite them, per the RFA, ... and this project directly addresses the RFA or something like that. And then you can also highlight, particular initiatives if it's not the RFA. Cannot emphasize this enough. You spend all this time on the logic, rationale, and the deep scientific and intellectual thought of the grant. If you do not use the prescribed font, page limits, and section headings, there's a good chance that you're going to get thrown out. One of the things that happened recently to one of my colleagues is sometimes when you save a PDF, it will go from Word to PDF. It'll inadvertently add an extra page. Grant was completely thrown out. Make sure that you check your PDFs to see that it hasn't added an extra page. Engage your study section. Contact program officers and, if possible, previous reviewers. You want to get their feedback on how well your project fits within their priorities and if they see any red flags. So these, I get this all the time for the Dunn grant. I have said on so many Dunn reviews, I know the triggers. Now, it changes often from study section to study section, but there are some flags that happen every single time. And so you want to talk to them. Reviewers want confidence that everything has been addressed from personnel to institution. And this can, while it's not as important as your significance and innovation, it can be the difference in funding or not. It can lift your score by a couple of points. You got to start writing 6 to 9 months before. You want your program officers to review your aims no later than 2 months prior to the due date. If you are able to, use mock reviews. Here's a couple of links for some resources in this space that NIH has. Now I'm just going to kind of briefly, high level, talk about some of the other R grants. R21, early stage feasibility grant. It's only $275,000 at the most, direct for 2 years. New ideas. You don't have to be an ESI, and they say you don't have to have preliminary data, but that is not true. If you do not have preliminary data, it doesn't have to be as compelling as an R01, but you better have preliminary data or you more than likely are not going to get an R21. The R03 is the small research grant. This is a pilot small scale non-renewable grant for short-term projects, $50,000 a year over 2 years. The K awards, these are the career development awards for early stage investigators. You have to have strong mentorship career plan. These are very, very they're very competitive, and typically they have limited indirect costs. The F&T series, these are the training and fellowships. These are for pre and postdoctoral trainees. You have to be from an institution, have to have a great career development plan, strong sponsor letters, and these usually cover stipend, tuition, and training costs. The P and U series are the larger grants, the Ps, the Us. These are typically multi-PI. They can be up to $5 million a year. We've got one right now that is about $3.5 million a year over 3 institutions. They typically have a centralized core, multiple centralized cores, a scientific core, an administrative core. These are coming out less often, but they're still there. And there is, a parent call out for most of the institutions. These are the types of grants that you meet with the program officer and say, hey, I have an idea. That's what we did with the one that we have. We met with NIAID. We said, this is our idea. And they're like, well, that's great, but that's kind of what we're interested in. But what we're more interested in is this. And so we were able to tweak it to make it exactly what they wanted. And then they reviewed it again before we even submitted the grant, and we got it. So definitely keep these in mind. Small business grants, if you have spun out a company or plan to spin out a company based on a technology that you've developed, these are phase 1 and phase 2 grants. You should talk to me about this. We support these, the development of these types of ideas through GCC Reach, which is another avenue for potentially funding some of your research. Cannot overemphasize the importance of state and regional funds, especially when the whole country is freaking out over current funding climate. TSU has definitely been the benefit of CPRIT grants. I'm going to cover the current ones very quickly. The individual investigator awards, these are up to $300,000 total costs per year for 3 years. They have similar awards, but for clinical trials, and these are up to $400,000 for up to 4 years. High impact, high risk. These are short-term feasibility. So this would kind of be similar to an R21. Obviously, all of these have to be focused on cancer research. These can be high-risk ideas that lack preliminary data, although you're going to be more competitive if you have preliminary data. Core Facility Support Award. These are to strengthen shared resource cores that serve multiple Texas cancer researchers, and again, up to $3 million over 5 years unless you're renewing, and then it's only $2 million. For all of the CPRIT awards, you have to be a Texas resident or move to Texas. In the case of these academic awards, these 4 right here, you have to be a Texas resident. Now, they also have recruitment awards, and these vary across the type of investigator that you want to attract, whether it is a professor, there's the REI, or an associate professor, or the first-time tenure track faculty, which is for junior faculty. The previous ones don't require it, but all of these require a match by the institution, and these are typically a 50% match for salary, at least salary. So next I want to talk about DBRIT. I think everybody is anticipating what this could be because CPRIT has been so beneficial. This is Dementia Prevention and Research Institute of Texas, just where it's at right now. It had Senate approval in May, awaiting Governor Abbott's signature. It will have a constitutional companion amendment that caps annual appropriations at $300 million over the next 10 years. It'll be governed by physicians and scientists with expertise in dementia. And this is kind of the timeline. So earliest possible launch date for this program would be December, so stay tuned. Can't ignore philanthropic funding. These can be disease specific versus general science. Encourage you to talk to your development office. Often there are several philanthropic groups or foundations that want to give one ask per year or per 5 years to your institution. Can you position your program so that a center in that space would be attractive to your institution to present to them? So sometimes it has to be presented to your development office. Sometimes you can reach out directly to things like the American Cancer Society, Susan G. Komen, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis. Almost all of these diseases have foundations. You want to emphasize translational impact and make sure you have strong stakeholder letters. Industry funding can be really helpful. These are unrestricted funding from pharma or biotech. Budgets can be up to $500,000 a year. Often they'll give you access to their libraries or other in-kind access to reagents. You got to think some things through. I've seen some people really mess up on this because often the fine print says you give up your rights to IP, or you give a substantial proportion of your intellectual property rights to the pharmaceutical company. You want to make sure you have the right to publish. Keep in mind, this is a different mindset. Often, if you want to keep your best invention, secret, you don't want to publish. So you want to make sure that you have the ability to publish if that's what you want to do. Here's some examples. There's a 16-year collaboration that was just renewed this year in China, but with Bayer, Eli Lilly, and Purdue also have one. Here are some current programs. Merck has a research grant program as well as an investigator studies program. The links are on the slides that you'll get. Here's some more. Pfizer has a competitive grants program as well as an investigator-sponsored research. I know that for these, you can go in and set up alerts so that you get them. I get these, and I get them fairly regularly. They always have a priority. They're always around a particular research interested disease interest at that time, and they do vary. They change over time. Roche has one. It's Canada and global. Novartis has had one. I will tell you that as I checked their website, it's unclear to me that there's a 2025 call, but I still encourage you to keep up with this one. Tips for these: definitely subscribe for these notifications, set calendar reminders for their submission deadlines, talk to them early to ensure the fit, and tailor your proposal to the funding priorities. I suspect that TSU, I know the RCMI has pilot grant programs. These can be very helpful to get your grant funded, at least for small proof of concept studies. There are some global and international funding calls. I've included those links here and some tips. These seem huge, and like Horizon Europe, US is eligible, but only as like a third party. But several other countries have begun to incentivize collaboration with American scientists. American scientists are known as being innovative. They want to collaborate, and because they see an opportunity because of the funding landscape here, there are more opportunities to collaborate for these international and global calls. Final thoughts and reminders. You got to start early. You got to stay on top of it. You've got to block out time on your calendar and not use it for other things. If you need to be faithful to do this rather than wait until the deadline is near. You need to meet at least once with your program officers after providing a specific aims page. No later than 6 months before, but I highly recommend 2 months before, because if you've done this, you will notice that program officers get irritated because when it gets close to the grant, that's when they're getting bombarded with everybody else. You're going to get the best feedback when they see you are really on top of it early. You want to outline your draft directly according to the RFA. Write down every point and every subpoint, and you want to make sure that you can over address every one of those. And even if you do it in bullet form, and even if you have 40 pages, you go back and cut later, but you want to make sure that you at least have those details. If English is not your first language, you want to use something to make sure that you're communicating what it is that you're trying to communicate. Grammarly can be very helpful for this. I will say that ChatGPT can be very, very helpful for this, but I am talking to a number of people who are trying to overuse ChatGPT, and I can tell you it will bite you on the butt. Hands down, it will never be completely accurate with you. Where I think ChatGPT is helpful is here is a paragraph, review this and make sure it is clear, concise, and a good sell. Or I will say, what recommendations, what's missing? Those are ways that you can use ChatGPT. You don't ever want to overuse it, but certainly with making sure that your text is understandable, it can be helpful. Strategy, 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 not just science, but what does my grant pipeline look like? Once a week, I look at, all of my notifications. Once a month, I visit these websites. I have the timeline. These are the ones I have in the pipeline, and I have a blocked out time on my calendar that I'm working on these regularly. Leverage TMC. This is our unique ace in the hole. We have the ability to collaborate. We have the ability to really get stakeholder feedback from patients and engage directly with them. I know that several of y'all are already doing that. And finally, collaborate. That is my job. That's what I do. This is the websites for GCC Reach and GCC. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much.
Did you see any questions there?
Yes. So, Dr. Tomlinson, we have one question in the Q&A. So he said, thanks, Suzanne. My question, AI can do so much more than what we think. How about utilizing AI in grant proposal development? When to use AI, such as ChatGPT, and how to make it more legit and truly help without trigger any issues.
So I address this a little bit at the end, but I'm happy to talk about this some more because I think that it is so important, and I am now hearing all of the drawbacks of overusing ChatGPT. For me, when I write a grant, I have found ChatGPT to be useful for a few things, okay? Anytime I get a summary statement, I read through it and I highlight all of the things. I try to categorize them. And I always want to do that myself first. But one of the things I've found ChatGPT to be helpful with is telling it to organize, summarize, give a bulleted list of every, to compile them into subcategories. So, because, sometimes several reviewers say the same thing. So I have found it to be helpful. I still don't completely trust it. So I always do it first, and then I look at the other. I will tell you that in this instance, it almost always identifies something that I miss, or it will also, unfortunately, sometimes combine things that it doesn't really understand that aren't really the same thing. So it's important to do both. You can't take it for granted. So I have found that it can be helpful in summarizing and articulating an outline for a summary statement. So when I get ready to do a resubmission, I can go back and look at that and use it. Another thing that it's really, really good at is it's all about how you enter a prompt. You have to be able to ask it the right thing. So I will hands down, anytime I want to, I have a compelling section, like an approach. Okay. If I'm looking at my approach, I can say, is this clear? How could I clarify this? Okay. Another possibility that I have used occasionally is once it has, I can give it my draft. Now, I will tell you, you always want to make sure when you're dealing with a grant, and this is based on your level of comfort, You can do your settings so that you are not improving the program. If you are improving the program, it now has access to your grant. So you want to make sure you keep everything private and that you are not letting it use your grant. I don't ever upload a whole grant. I will take a piece that seems like it may not be clear and say, how could I clarify this? One of the things that I have done is if I think something is innovative, I will ask it. Now, it depends on the type of subscription that you have to ChatGPT. If you have one of the higher level subscriptions, you can ask it to do a deep search and say, I think this project is innovative because of this, this, and this. How does that compare to other similar projects? Is it indeed innovative? Okay, I can also ask things like, is there something I've missed? How could this be more innovative? I mean, you can ask it things, but it's a tool. And I highly recommend that it does nothing but be a tool for helping you think through things. You know, how could I frame it differently? What have I missed? That kind of thing. So far, that's the only way I've used it. I can tell you that it absolutely if you do the deep searches and you prompt it to use only vetted sources and you give it a criteria for how reliable you think the source is, there's ways that you can do that, but you still can't trust it, especially with citations. You can, it's helpful to point you in a direction, but I can tell you that often you'll find that there's no resource there. And so it's still, and I mean, this is the nature of AI that's using lots of global information. There's a lot of bad data out there. So anyway, I hope that's helpful. I can't, again, I'm not the huge expert, but all I can share is this is how I have found it to be helpful and how I feel like it could be useful.
Thank you so much. So in the meantime, Dr. Scott Whitman has shared a NIH policy on AI, and I have posted into the chat for everyone to see. And then we have a follow-up question about the ChatGPT. Someone asked, how about ChatGPT to review and rewrite research strategy when a draft is complete? Like if we have a draft.
So you're saying upload the whole draft and tell it to rewrite it?
Yep. Rewrite it.
Well, I think for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, at least my own personal level of comfort, and I have one of the higher paid subscriptions that, you have the option to make sure you're not sharing data, that it's completely private and you can do deep searches. If there is a particular section that you're just struggling with, I don't see a problem in asking it, how could I clarify this? I will definitely, I have used it to ask for subject headings. Something that's very, very general, like an abstract that doesn't have the details of what you're doing, I would feel more comfortable with uploading an abstract and saying, how could you rewrite this to be maybe more compelling or organize this better to have a more logical flow. You want it to be easy for the reviewer to read. But I've come across, I have a colleague who is brilliant, but he has learned the hard way, and he did a whole bunch of grants at one time that he wasn't asking it to rewrite. It was basically saying, this is what I have. This is what the RFA says. Write me a grant. Killed. So again, it is a tool, and it has to be really, really heavily scrutinized before using it, especially on something you're going to submit to the government.
There's another AI question. Using AI tools to improve graphics and figures in grants, is it acceptable?
Well, I guess I'd have to point you to this NIH guideline that Scott sent. I haven't even read it yet. I honestly don't know anything about images. That's not something that I've done for grants.
We have one more question. Would it be possible to share this informative slides with us for grant follow-up?
Oh, absolutely. I'm happy to. I'll send them to you and you can share them.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we didn't see any other questions. Thank you again. Really informative, very great presentation. We really appreciate for you coming to us. Thank you. Have a good day.
Absolutely. You as well. Thanks again for the invitation.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Mhm.